What's up, guys? Ben here. We're bringing you another video today. Holiday Champs has happened. We've crowned a winner. We're going to go ahead and do off-season videos now for the 8 teams that played at the event. We're going to go ahead and start with OpTic Texas. A little bit of an interesting journey this year. We're going to talk about the journey, talk a bit about where they stand overall with the team, and going this off-season, what they should do with their roster if they want to go ahead and try and win a chip next year. So let's talk a little about their journey so far this season. For context, if you guys kind of are new or kind of don't know how this team formed, there were 2 franchises originally that kind of formed this roster. You had what was the Dallas Empire team, and you had what was Chicago Huntston, which became Chicago OpTic during the Cold War year. As the whole situation around OpTic and NRG sort of evolved and changed over the last 2 years, Hector was looking to sort of change that situation, so they came to an agreement with Team Envious, ended up moving their team off of that Chicago spot. That spot inevitably got sold to Boston, so they joined forces with Envy and formed a super team with SHOTZZY Illy from the Empire team, Scump and Dashy from the Chicago team. And I think sort of a thesis and sort of my kind of like overarching statement, we'll dive into each of these individual events, is it was a pretty good season and they started off with an event win, but the injury definitely kind of derailed their progress this year as a team. And once again, it was another season where they fell behind the meta. And when they got the champs, there were teams sort of in a class above and they weren't really able to make it to that grand final opportunity to get a ring. So let's talk about it. So they start off the season, Kickoff Classic. Look, them and FaZe are teams that have to wait that first day and they get smoked on the second day, whatever. Not a big deal. It's a preseason tournament. They pull up to the Major 1 qualifiers and have a bit of an interesting journey. They struggle early in the qualifiers, but they have a really good last 2 weeks and come into the Major 1 event with the 4th seed behind Thieves, London, and FaZe. And to that point, like they lost to Minnesota and London, but they went 3-0 down the stretch. They beat Paris, they beat Toronto, and they beat Boston. So a good showing from them online. They were definitely in the mix going to the Major 1 event at their home arena, Esports Stadium, Arlington. And it was a great event for OpTic Texas, man. They ended up getting the event W. They beat a lot of good teams along the way. They 3-0'd Seattle to start. Reverse swept Atlanta FaZe in winter semis, an impressive series from the OpTic Texas boys coming back from 0-2. They took care of business against London. FaZe, who then lost to Texas, made a little bit of a losers bracket run. They beat Thieves in the game 5. They took care of both the EU-based teams. They 3-0 Toronto and 3-1 London. And then in that last grand finals, the depth of OpTic and I think the individual performances of players like Illy and SHOTZZY and Dashy, and even Seth had his moments. They outlasted that FaZe team, especially after that Tuscan control. I think that was sort of the swing in the middle of that series. They were able to get it done in 7. And for a franchise that had just formed, pulling up to the first event in their home arena, they start off the season on a strong foot. And at that point, a lot of people were like, okay, this team might be the team to beat this season. Finally, someone's usurped FaZe, and these guys might be able to actually win a chip this year. And look, they carry it going on into the Major 2 qualifiers. They go 5-0. They drop 3 maps. They were dominant on Tuscan Control and Tuscan Hardpoint. They were dominant on Gava2, and they showed it in this Major 2 qualifier by beating a lot of teams. They beat FaZe again. They beat Florida. They beat LAG, LA Thieves, and Seattle. Unfortunately for them, from my understanding, this is sort of around the time that Illy started to have issues with his hand. And I think this is sort of a big turning point for this season when they pulled up to Minnesota for Major 2. Very surprised 3-0 loss to Seattle at the offset of the tournament. That was definitely not expected, considering how well they were playing the weeks prior. They did take care of business against the home team Minnesota and what was a very emotional series within the venue. They beat Thieves in a Game 5 heartbreaker for Thieves. This is sort of back when Thieves' S&D was a bit so they were losing some tough Game 5s. And then the first of many losses to a weird team in terms of matchups for OpTic, which is Florida. They 3-1 into OpTic Texas home in top 6. And really what I think was sort of a disappointing tournament for OpTic, I felt like they had the talent to definitely get top 4 or top 3 at this event. I don't think anyone was beating LAG the way they were playing S&D. But I definitely think that if you look at the Texas roster and the Florida rosters on paper, right? Like you would think that OpTic should beat them like 5 times out of 6, but they couldn't really do it at points this season. This is one of those events. So Pro-Am Classic. And this was the event in Columbus at Belong. And this was a funky one for OpTic, right? Is Inter going to play? Is he not going to play? He ended up coming to the event. He played for 5 seconds and then general plays. Just a really weird kind of series of sequences for OpTic. But they actually played pretty good at this event, low key. Once again, can't beat Florida on land. They lose to them 0-3, but they do take care of business against Minnesota Rocker, who obviously were struggling at the time, and the Toronto Ultra Academy EU team, who finished last in the group. And then we get to the bracket stage, and once again, they get in a banger series against FaZe. They go down 0-2, and they're able to close out and reverse sweep. Really impressive victory from them. But they did lose to Thieves in 4 maps and end up finishing top 4 at the event. So for this event, OpTic does end up rolling with ProLoot for a majority, if not the entire major, because Ender's taking a rest due to the hand issue. So they're playing with the quasi sub, but someone they had decent practice with at this point. They again played pretty good online, 4-1. Their only loss was to a New York team that was definitely really trying to get back in form after some of their moves. They beat Atlanta FaZe again. They beat Florida, LAG, and LA Thieves. So, you know, kind of my sort of assessment on the OpTic side is you're continuing to have this advantage against FaZe, playing good against Thieves. LAG obviously just won the last event. So you're feeling good, like with ProLoot, that you have an opportunity again to place a good replacing. OpTic Texas is like first or second in CDL points. So they have an opportunity, depending on how they play, to really lock in a top 2 seed. An interesting dynamic that I kind of want to also speak on in regards to OpTic, because it kind of ties in the major, is this was a weird major in which, in some fluke massive way, Florida and Thieves end up being tied on all the tiebreakers after the major 3 qualifiers for the 7th and 8th spot. They had to play a tiebreaker to determine who was going to play the first seed and who was going to play the second seed. And Thieves end up getting 3-0'd. So Thieves will get 8th seed and play Minnesota, whereas Florida would have to face up against OpTic. And y'all probably see where this is going, right? Florida versus OpTic. And y'all, guess what happens again? Game 5, Florida gets it done. OpTic pull up to the Toronto major, and they get once again in real trouble in the first round of winners and have to fight through losers. And so for OpTic, they do end up taking care of business against LAG and London. So 2 back-to-back 3-0s, but they run into a Thieves team that was coming off a really tough loss to FaZe, and they actually end up getting OpTic out of the tournament. Once again, a top 6, taking it in 4 maps. Another opportunity for Texas, I think. Again, one where I think there's definitely a world where they should have placed top 4 at this event. Mind you, they're playing with ProLoot, and we'll get to his stats on land sort of later in this video. But again, for OpTic, losing early in winners makes it really tricky, and they come up a little bit short trying to make it to Sunday and maybe have an opportunity to finish the losers run and make it to grand finals. All right, so we get to the major 4 qualifiers. At this point, you know, even with the top 6s and some of the inconsistency, OpTic still a top seed. They're basically going to champs at this point. It's locked. Ender comes back for a portion of this stage. So they started off with ProLoot. It doesn't go particularly well, and they roll the rest with Ender, and they still struggle online. They actually end up having to start in losers, going 1-4. With their only victory against Paris, they lost to Toronto, they lost to New York, to Minnesota. They literally lost to all the teams on the bubble. So there's a little more passion probably on those teams than on OpTic, who's trying to kind of figure it out with Ender. But they finally have gotten that core together, and they're trying to get some kind of momentum before Call of Duty champs. All right, so we get to Major 4. This is the banger at King's Theater, Brooklyn, New York. For OpTic, as we said, they start in losers, and they have to play a Minnesota team that needs to win in order to actually qualify and have an opportunity to qualify for champs. It's a banger series. It goes a distance. Minnesota really challenges them, but another heartbreaker for Minnesota, man. Like, this was a team that lost a bunch of back-to-back game 5s. OpTic bounced them out of the tournament, out of the season. They take care of business against Boston, a team that, you know, they've handily sort of had the number against for most of the season. And a very nice victory for OpTic Texas in losers round 3 against a really strong Toronto team. I think you could say that Toronto probably should have won a few more maps in that series, but OpTic clutched up some really key gunfights, especially in that Bocage S&D at the end. And they get into top 4. And you're feeling good, OpTic Texas, going into Sunday. You got a chance against FaZe, who you've had their number all season. You're going to play either Thieves or New York. Like, there is a legit shot for OpTic, you know, to make it to grand finals. Unfortunately, they pull up to the match against FaZe, and after really struggling for most of these matchups, Abizi has a massive series against Texas. He sends them home on that Tuscan hardpoint, and FaZe get it done in 4. And for Texas, once again, you're coming up short. You've had top 6, top 4 at the last 3 majors. Not the momentum you want going into champs. So OpTic Texas pull up. First round matchup at champs. They have to play Toronto Ultra. Another classic banger between these two teams, but Texas get it done in map 5. Was probably, like, if you looked at the matchups, if we look at the, you know, we all had game 5s on the first day of the event, but that OpTic Texas Toronto matchup was definitely circled as one of the tougher matchups on that day, especially how good Toronto is at S&D and OpTic struggles in control. But they get it done, they grind it out, and they advance the next day. Where they run up against LA Thieves, one of your grand finalists. And Thieves absolutely mollywopped them in this series. It was not close. Probably the worst loss for Texas so far this season. And a real momentum shift, I think, for this Texas team as they get ready to pull up to Saturday and try and make the full run to get to the grand finals. So they start off Saturday with a very interesting 3-over against New York. They go up pretty heavily in the first 2 maps. There's a long delay with Crim's audio set up in between the third map. Everybody's saying Crim's stalling, yada, yada. But they get it done pretty handily in that third map, and they bounce back from the Thieves' loss with a big 3-0 against a strong New York team. And okay, you now got a shot. You got to win a couple of series left, but you have a legit chance to make it to grand finals. And guys, once again, they get to this loser semi stage, and it's a real problem for them. They run up against a Seattle team that was absolutely on a roll in hardpoint, and Pred comes out and dominates as he had been all week. And once again, Texas don't even get a chance to get this to game 5. Seattle has their number in the respawns. Bada bing, bada boom. And for OpTic Texas, after what was a great start to the season, you end up finishing top 4 champs. You take home a few bucks, but these guys really would have wanted to make it to the grand finals. And look, my last thoughts on sort of Texas-Seattle series, we got to mention this play. Like, could this series have gone different in the control if they didn't line up and Pred didn't get the 2-piece? Yeah, probably could have gone maybe a little bit differently, but I still kind of liked Seattle. Maybe game 5, OpTic's a little bit favored because Seattle kind of struggled in S&D. In the next series, they played against FaZe, like got a class in the S&D. But for OpTic, once again, a tough bounce, but just coming up short and not able to sort of get to that upper echelon and really have a chance to make it to grand finals. So let's take a look at some overall stats from the team this season. Shout out my boy Easy Mac for the sheet that y'all see in front of you. Prolute obviously subbed in for the team for about a month and a half and was serviceable, but as you see from the stats, wasn't a plus player in the way that I think they needed from an Ender replacement or Ender sub. 0.95 is not bad, but you know, if he was probably closer to a 1-1, maybe they had a little more of a chance. That's maybe a hot take out of me, but sure. But serviceable from him, not horrific, not bad, but average. Ender with the 0.98 this season, again, not too bad. Ender's playing kind of a gap fill role on this team, so really hard to get a 1 when you're doing that, but kill difference of 33 kills at the end of the season is not a lot. That's a couple of series right there, so I think decent shot from him, but you know, this has been sort of his career spot. He's always been a little bit of a sub 1.0 player at the end of the season. Obviously, we got to talk about Bruce's stats. He was an MVP candidate, him and MC, and obviously Celia won that MVP, but for Bruce, another great season. I think he took a lot of developmental steps as a player this season, and he should be applauded for that, being a better teammate. The hard work, obviously it struggled for 2 years, and the OGLA situation and the Chicago OpTic situation has improved a lot as a player. Obviously he's been known as a good slayer, but was a big contributor to this team this season. And taking a look at the sub players on the team, Scump and SHOTZZY, they ended up the season with a 102 for Scump and a 106 for SHOTZZY. Good overall numbers compared to the field of subs. It definitely is above average. Where these two struggled was at the end of the season. At stage 4, they were both averaging around a 0.95. And at champs, Scump had a 0.97, but SHOTZZY really struggled. He actually had below a 9 KD, definitely one of his worst events, I think, since probably the beginning of Modern Warfare. So like my kind of general thesis, overall stats, and look, we can dive in on specific numbers, but I don't want to make this video like 45 minutes. The categories are going to look good for these players. They didn't obviously slay their best ability at the end of the season. Their problem though is less about like their ability to shoot people in you know, trades and non-trade kill percentage and who plays fast and yada yada. I think they really struggled this season when they lost Ender for a period of time to stay ahead of everybody else. Definitely did not keep pack with FaZe and Thieves, who I thought were probably the 2 best respawn teams at the end of the season. They were your matchup in the grand finals of champs, and they struggled to get back to that level they were at Major 1, where they were very competitive, and if not the best respawn team or the best control team, they were definitely top 2 in those categories. All right, so let's talk about the roster, contract situation, what they should do, all that stuff. So taking a look at this, obviously Ender and SHOTZZY, I was able to confirm, are free agents in this upcoming offseason. I believe that's because they were coming from their Dallas Empire contracts. I expect them to re-sign. There'll obviously be teams who will be able to talk to them, and I already know that there are a couple of teams probably out there in the ether that are going to do it anyway. But I expect these guys to stay. I mean, there's no reason for them to leave OpTic. The general situation is still a little bit unclear to me from a sub standpoint, but if they want him back, they'll have him back. Prolute as a bench team option, I could see them maybe picking him back up as a sub, but they'll probably hold off a sec on that decision. And you got Rambo and Sender holding down from the coach position. I expect both those to come back. So there are a lot of different ways that OpTic can go about this. I think probably the best thing for them, like if you sit me and you tell me, okay, what can OpTic do better? You would probably tell me Illy is probably the more inconsistent player on the team because you really can't drop Scump. You really can't drop Scump or SHOTZZY, and obviously Bruce is very good. So if someone's going to go, it's going to be Ender. But the problem is if you replace Ender You need a player that can gap fill, and also give you more production than Inter does. So someone's got to be able to drop a 1 and do it. They got to be able to play quick, and they got to be able to have good comms. And that is not a particularly long list. If you look at like free agent subs here, there's not a lot of options. If you look at some of the free agent ARs, there's some interesting ones here, but I don't know if they're necessarily fits, right? Would Clay go back to OpTic after not being on the org for a long time? It's possible, but I don't know if those guys want a team with Clay. I would have told, if you would ask me 2 years ago, Parisi would be a great fit as a replacement for Illy. But Preston's also had his struggles with slaying consistently. So that's not really a 100% certainty. Dylan can play flex, but I'm concerned that him and Bruce would have conflicting play styles. I could probably see it. He's probably the most likely of this list, but I would need some convincing to see the fit personally. So my general kind of thought process here, I think if you're OpTic, is this. I think you stick it with these 4 guys, but with a catch. I think it is super important that you have a substitute on your bench that is a hedge against potentially making, or not against making, but so you can make a roster move in the middle of the season if you feel like you are missing that punch from Illy in order to be a very competitive team. And you may say to me, oh, Ben, you can just pick up a sub, in December or in January and yada, yada, yada. And I get it. I see the school of thought in it. Personally, it's not how I would operate my team. If I have the opportunity now to go ahead and hedge against risk on my roster, why would I not do that? Because you're picking up someone for the minimum. If you want to pivot, you can figure out how to buy out of that contract and you're only on the hook for a couple of more months and you can pick up someone else. The problem is if you wait and then you're OpTic and it's like, well, now we need to pick up a aggressive sub player, right? Hypothetically. I don't think it would happen in that role, but hypothetical sub. Bro, you might have to compete with 3 or 4 teams to pick up a player. And yeah, I get it, you're OpTic, and you probably are on top of that pile because you're OpTic. But you go from being able to select the person that you want in the preseason and in the offseason and get them locked, and now you're rolling the dice a little bit. So that's my approach. The option B for me that I could see them trying to do, again, if the navigation is a little about the Inter thing, we could say, well, what if you move Scump to the flex-ish role and you bring in another sub player? I look at this list of players and I struggle to really see amongst the free agents a player that I think is a great fit for their camp. So I don't know necessarily if this is a great option for them. It is a possible option. We would probably look at Seattle, right, and be like, what would it cost us to get Pred? It's probably a couple $1,000,000, so it's probably not doable. So again, I don't think it's a realistic option, but it is a route that they can go down. My personal guess is they're going to go with option A, though. They're going to stick it. Whether or not they pick up a sub or not, I think is TBD. That's how I would do it. They may not necessarily do that. They may have trust in their 4 players. And if they got to make a move later in the season, they'll do it. So yeah, that'll do it for this video, guys. Final thoughts. I would say there was some success for OpTic this season. There's a lot to like. You know that this team works and that you won an event this season on Vanguard, which craziest seasons of Call of Duty of all time is definitely up there. But once again, for this camp, they were not at their best form at the end of the season. And that's the biggest thing they need to address going into the next offseason, where we will likely have a cycle where we're playing the same game for 2 years. How do you get ahead through the marathon this season and have a better performance at champs? I think that's going to be the priority that they are looking for to address any potential roster changes or mindset changes going into the offseason. Well, guys, if you liked the video, go ahead and leave a comment below. Let me know if you agree. I know your OpTic fans are passionate. We're going to get some wins and lens in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think they should do? Who should they swap out? Who should they bring in? Let's have a conversation in the comments. If you like the video, go ahead and hit me with a like. Always, we'll take a subscribe to my channel. We're going to be pumping out content throughout the off season. We're going to keep doing these preview videos for y'all, and as well as bringing in some really good long form interview content, so be on the lookout for that. And with that, we'll see y'all on the next one.